Welcome back to the generic crafting tutorial series. In this episode, we're going to be creating our gathering node and the functionality that goes along with it. So sit tight, this is going to be a pretty big episode. The first thing I want to do is come into my generic crafting and I want to make a new folder here called objects. We're going to have a bunch of objects placed throughout our world during this series, so that's why we're using an objects folder to keep it nice and neat. Inside of objects, I'm going to create another folder, and I'm going to call this gathering node. Well, I'm actually just going to call it gathering. You can call it gathering, gathering node, whatever you want to call it here is perfectly fine. And I'm going to create one more folder, and this is going to be called meshes. So we're going to put all of our meshes in here, and I'll have all those also available for free in the link in the description from the cloud, so probably Google. Anyway. Inside of our objects, gathering, we're going to have our mesh. We're going to create a blueprint class of an actor. I'm going to call this BP underscore gathering node. Okay? And we'll just start with that for now. We're going to be making a bunch of structures throughout this episode as well, so make sure you stick with me. Open up our BP gathering node. And the first thing I'm going to do here is just add a static mesh and a sphere collision. So we're going to add static mesh, and drag that over the default scene route, and we're going to add a sphere collision. And this is just kind of a personal preference of mine. This is how I like to handle interactions with collision spheres. You can kind of handle this however you really want to. You don't necessarily have to use collision spheres. You can use line traces and lookats. Whatever you want to use is going to be perfectly fine. But for this tutorial series, I'm going to use sphere collisions because they're my favorite. It's what I like to use. It's just how I kind of like to do things. So inside of our construction script here, this is going to be one of the most important parts of the actual cosmetics of the gathering node. As you notice, we didn't actually set anything to our static mesh here. It's just going to be empty. So if I drag this out into the world right now, it's just going to be empty. Nothing in it. Just that collision sphere. So we want to go into our construction script, and we want to have some kind of logic to actually put this into the world. And that's where our first major structure is going to come into place. So I'm going to make a Boolean. And this is going to be B use hard data table. Okay. B use hard data table. We're going to make sure this is instance and exposed. And we're going to add a little note here that says, do you want to set up the mesh materials /icon via data table? And again, this is kind of a personal preference thing. If you know you're going to use a data table or you know you're not going to use a data table, you totally don't have to do this. You can just set it up whichever one you wanted to. But because I made this project for the Fab Marketplace, I wanted to give people the option to decide whether or not they wanted to go through every item and set it up manually when they drag it into the world, or if they wanted to use a hard data table to get all that detail right out into the data table. So again, a personal preference here. It's totally all this is. So we need another value here, and that's going to be called item ID. That is going to be of the type name. Whoops, not float, name. Instance and expose. This is very important. This is the exact item ID of the item for the data table. Okay, so I'm going to leave a little comment here. The item ID for lookup in the data table must be set to work, because we are absolutely going to be using an item data table to actually handle what all of the items do in the game and kind of how they work. And I'll have a copy of that data table in the description for you, along with all the assets we used in this video. But we are absolutely going to be using a data table to get that to work, because otherwise it is a massive pain to set up thousands and thousands of items. Okay, so now we need to get our actual hard data. Just stick with me here. So we're going to make a blueprint structure. We're going to call this ItemHardData, or S ItemHardData. Some people use ST, some people use other prefixes. I just use S. Nice and simple for me. And we're going to need some values inside of this in order to get it to work. And this is basically going to be all of the hard data we need. So the textures, the meshes, the materials, and a reference to the actor. So first we're going to say item ID. And this is kind of just for debugging. We just need that item ID to basically match the item ID of the gathering node. And this is going to help us just kind of keep things nice and organized when we are making data tables, if you decide to do that. That way your item ID is always the same as your row name. We're going to make an icon, which is going to be texture 2D. This helps if I just type in texture 2D, huh? We're going to add our mesh, which is going to be static mesh. And we're going to add our materials, which is going to be material instance. And this is totally up to you whether you just use one material instance or if you use an array. If your mesh has multiple slots, kind of like the player, let's look at it real quick before we move on. Kind of like how the player mesh here has multiple elements in the materials. If you're going to be using items with static meshes that have multiple item materials, you're going to want to use an array. I just use an array anyway, just because it's kind of more systematic in case I want to add like a one-off mesh that does happen to have two materials. I don't in this project, but if I did, I'd be able to just add in that second material for the mesh. We're going to add one more value. And this is only relevant if you're actually going to be spawning something from this. I don't spawn anything from this in this example game, but you might, right? You might have like a sword or a shield that you want to actually set up an item actor class because you're going to need to spawn that object into the world. So that's something that's totally up to you. Most of the time for us, this is just going to be blank. It's not going to do anything. Okay. So now inside of our gathering node, we are going to add a new variable, and we're going to call that ItemHardData. And that's going to be of the type s_ItemHardData, the one that we just made there. Make sure this is instance and exposed. And we're going to leave a little comment, ItemsHardData assets. So inside of our gathering node now, we're going to decide whether or not we want to use the data table. In order to use the data table, we will need to have a data table. So back in our objects here, we're going to go ahead and create a miscellaneous, and you don't have to do this if you're not using the data table. Well, you kind of do if you're following the example, but if you're not using that value at all, then you don't have to do this. But we call this DT ItemHardData. And you can see in here, if we were to add a item in here, we could say maybe this is item ID 1, which is how we're going to do our items. By the way, I'm not going to use exact names. I'm going to use numbers. So we're going to have a data table. If you look at the data table that I have in the description, you'll see that every item has a just number ID, but it's actually a name, but it's just a number. It's just a little bit easier for me to kind of manage. We can go ahead and select the icon, so you're going to select whatever icon you would want for it, whatever mesh you would be using for it, whatever materials, again, if you're using multiple materials, so on and so forth. That's how you're going to set all that up here. Like I said, we're not actually using this for anything, so we don't actually need it, but if you wanted to use a data table instead of manually setting everything up, that is exactly what you would do. And we're going to set up all those values manually in just a minute. That's just kind of how I prefer to run items like this in the world with the hard assets. The soft assets are all going to be set via a data table, but the hard assets I kind of like to do as I manually place items in the world. So if you want to use that data table, you're going to get the data table row. You're going to pass in item ID. Make sure it's the ItemHardData data table. And we're going to set this directly to the ItemHardData. And then we're going to continue on with our lives. But I'm not actually going to be doing that, so I'm going to be running primarily this false. So I need to get my item. I'm going to set members. You don't actually need to do this. You can set the item ID in this hard data if you want. But I like to set it as this right here. So when I'm setting up the item later, you'll see that I'm setting the hard. I'm not actually setting anything in the hard ID. I'm setting the item ID, and I'm just passing that into hard in case for whatever reason I end up needing it later. So we're going to set that member. Okay. We're going to come in here. We're going to grab our static mesh, and we're going to set static mesh. This is going to come right out of both of these. So no matter which you chose, right, by this point, your ItemHardData is set. So we're going to get our ItemHardData. I'm going to break it open. And I'm going to need pretty much all of these things. So we're going to get our mesh and plug that right in. Okay. If you want to promote the icon to a variable, maybe you need icons later on or whatever, you can promote that. I did that in the example project. I really didn't need to, but I did. So that's just something you can do. I'm not going to do that here, though. We're going to come in here. We're going to set material from the static mesh. We're going to take our materials here. Remember, we made this an array. So I'm going to run that through a for each. You could check length greater than 1 if you wanted to just get a copy of 0 and add it to the element index. But I'm going to run a for each so that pretty much no matter what happens, this is going to set the proper array elements. So we're going to take array index, pass that into the material element index, and take our array element, pass that into material. And that's all we're going to do here. Now our item will be set up to whatever we chose. So if we chose to set it up via data table, it's going to set up via data table. If we chose to not set up via data table, which is what we're about to do, it's going to not set it up via the data table. So now I need some actual meshes inside of the game. In order to do that, you just drag the mesh out. You just drag the mesh in, and it'll set itself up. So if I go into my downloads here, I've got quite a few of these. So if I go into my downloads here, I'm only going to do this once. The other ones I'm just going to go ahead and set up. But we have our OR. And we have our OR here, which is this FBX file. Should be this one. I'm just going to do both. So we're going to take both of these and we're going to drag them in here. Actually, we're going to make a folder first called OR. And we're going to drag them in here. I have the FBX import out options. I'm just going to import all. It's going to give me a little error, no smoothing. That's fine. I don't really care. And we're going to call this SM OR vein. Call this M OR vein. I'm going to call this T OR vein. Now I'll be here all day if I try to actually set these up one by one and do all the material instances. So I'm just going to show you how I set everything up once, and you can go ahead and set them up however you want. I'm just going to import the stuff from my other project though. So inside of the material for OR vein, I wanted to give them a different color based on just this one because I'm kind of lazy. I didn't want to make 50 million materials and custom meshes for every single thing in the game. We just use one OR vein for every different type of OR we have. So I'm going to open up this material for OR vein. I'm going to get a blend overlay. So you can use blend overlay. Some of them I use color burn. Some of them I use lighten. Kind of just depends on what you want. You'll have to come and tool around with whatever you think looks the best. So we're going to plug our RGB from a texture sample into that blend overlay. I'm going to take out this blend v3 here. I'm going to press the 3 key. That's going to give me a true 3 vector color. That color here doesn't really matter. I'm just going to put it at white. That way it's visible. That's just going to be the default. I'm going to right click, convert that to a parameter, call it color. And that way when I make my material instance, I can override this color. And you're going to want to do that for pretty much anything you want. Again, we're keeping it simple here because I don't want to spend too much time doing all these materials. This is something you're going to have to do custom for your game anyway. So we're going to call this MI, let's just say iron ore. You're going to want to do one of these for every different type of ore that you want to have, a different color in your game. So my iron ore, we're going to open that up. I'm going to open up the global vector parameter here. I'm going to get the color. And I'm going to make this kind of a weird gold irony color. Rust, I guess. It's just going to be this color here. That's all I'm going to do. Okay. And we're going to do that a whole bunch of different times. So real quick here, I'm going to show you how to migrate basically all of the meshes. I'm going to go ahead and do this for all of the meshes that we have in our example game. Again, all these static meshes and their base materials will be available on the cloud for you, but all of the material instances will not. So you'll have to go ahead and make those as you see fit, as you need them. But for your game, you're probably going to be using different meshes anyway. So this isn't exactly something you need to do. This is just making it a little bit easier for me to kind of demonstrate this video. So I'm going to right click on my meshes. I'm going to click migrate. You're going to see that we have all of our meshes, material instances, and textures in here. I'm going to say OK. We're going to find our generic crafting demo here, which is the one that we're currently working on. And go into the content folder, select the folder, and it's going to go ahead and migrate all that stuff. So I don't actually need this ore vein example I was giving you. Yeah, that's fine. So content, we have our generic crafting demo meshes, and these are again all of the meshes that we had there. So I'm going to take this meshes folder. I'm just going to move that straight into gathering. Let's load 81 assets, that's fine. Then I'm going to delete all this because I don't need the double generic crafting in here. We're going to go into our objects, gathering, and I don't actually need mesh. We'll just keep that as meshes. And boom. So we have all of this stuff now in the game. Again, you're going to have to do whatever it is you want to do with your meshes and materials here. These are just the sample ones that I'm making, that I've made for demonstration. Okay, now we are going to set up our gathering node. So if you have your gathering node placed into the world, go ahead and select it. If not, don't worry too much about it. So we're just going to drag the gathering node right into the world. You're going to put this wherever you want to make a gathering node. So if you're like in a forest and you set up your mesh for like a broken log, you can put the gathering node there and make it the static mesh for the broken log that you want to use. Okay. So for this, we have our use hard data table. It's going to be false. I don't want to do that. You have our item ID. Now you're going to be deciding what item IDs you want to use based on the data table that we're about to put in. For now, we're just going to call this item ID 1, which is going to be our bronze ore. Okay. Take our ore vein. Take our static mesh for the ore. Drag that into mesh. Add our material. We'll do iron ore. Only one material element needed. So we'll have that there. And we don't need an item class. I don't actually need an icon. I didn't make icons for these, but if you wanted icons, there's plenty of packs out there. You can just add in whatever you want for the icon. For this example project, I'm not even going to be using icons. It's just something that I know most people will probably want in theirs. Okay. So now we have our gathering node in here. If you have noticed, the collision sphere is not big enough. We're going to make that 64. So I want the sphere to be like poking out just a little bit so that when I walk up to it, it'll actually interact. So 64 is big enough for me. If you want to make it a little bit bigger, that's up to you. If you want to make it a dynamic value, you would come into your gathering node here, set the sphere radius. So after you're completed, you get your collision sphere and set the sphere radius to something more dynamic. If you want to calculate it based on your mesh, you can do that. Most of the meshes I set up for this example are about the same size, so 64 is pretty much always going to be good. Like I said, anytime you want to add another gathering node out into your world, okay, you can just go in, set the item ID to whatever you want, set it to 3. It's going to go ahead and automatically set that, and maybe 3 is going to be steel, right? 5 is going to be silver. Oops. So, Yeah, that's how we're going to set all those up in the game. Now, what is this item ID? You're probably wondering by now, what are we actually using this for? So let's go ahead and make that. So inside of our objects, we don't really want this inside of here. We're just going to move that up into objects because it's not exclusive to the gathering node. It's all of the objects in the game. But we're going to make another structure here. And we're going to call this ItemSoftData. And this soft data is going to be that data table that is in the description for you. So I'll go ahead and actually open that up. That way we can kind of see it. So this is the Google Sheets for that. As you can see, it comes with a lot, right? A lot of stuff. A couple hundred lines. Again, it's not perfect. You're going to want to edit this for your own project based on everything you're doing. I just wanted to have a nice, robust example. So we have the basic class, right? Iron. Iron's item line 1. The iron ingot, which gets refined from the iron ores, item line 3. Or item line 2. Item line 3 is another rough one, so the steel ore, and then we have the steel ingot. So that is what this item ID is the item ID for the lookup in the data table. You're going to want to make sure your data table row matches that item ID. So what I'm going to do real quick is I'm going to take this, I'm going to download it as CSV, and we're going to call that generic crafting item sheet 1. That's perfectly fine. Okay. And all those values in there that you just saw are what this structure is going to contain. So that we're going to have to build out this structure for everything that that data table contained. So first is going to be item ID of the type name. And we're going to need a ton of stuff here, so I'm just going to make a bunch. This is going to be totally up to you what you actually want to do with these values. So we have our display name, which is going to be a string. Our description, which is going to be a string. Hope I spelled that right. Item type we haven't made yet. Crafting type we haven't made yet, so we're going to have to make those here in a second. Stack size, this is the integer for how many of this item can be stacked in total. So if you could stack only one for like equipment, or if you can stack 999, that's going to be that. Value is also going to be an integer. And that's going to be how much the item is worth for vendors when you're reselling. Weights, I didn't actually use here. But if you wanted to have a weight-based inventory system, it's good to have the weight as a float value. If you don't want to use that, you can go ahead and just remove the weight column from the data table. Same thing with stats. If you don't want to use stats, you can remove that from the data table, but we're going to have to make that structure real quick. Equipment type, if you're not using equipment, again, you can skip this part and remove that from the data table. Items required, which is going to be an array of names. And these are going to be all of the different items that are required to craft this item. So that's pretty important that we have that set up here. Same thing here, quantity required. And those are going to be all of the different amounts of items that we need to have created in order for this to work. So if we have like, we're going to require 1 iron ingot, 1 steel ingot, you're going to want to map those all out like you see in the data table. I made one too many. Enhancement level. This is, again, if you're going to be doing enhancements in the game. If you're not going to be doing enhancements in the game, don't worry too much about it. You can just delete that row from the data table. And required level, which is also going to be an integer. And this is another thing that we're going to be deciding later on if you want to use classes and levels in order to determine what the player can and can't gather. Then we're going to be using required level here. So I'm just going to make sure that I spelled everything right because it's going to be bad times if I didn't. We're going to find out when we import the data table if we didn't. So now I need a few enumerators for all of these values that we have yet to set in. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new folder here called enums. That way I have all the, I'm going to folderize all that other stuff in just a minute as well. So we're going to have an enum for item type. We're going to have an enum for CraftingType. And we're going to have one for equipment slots. We're going to make another folder here for data tables, just to keep this nice and clean. And another folder here for structs. Just to keep everything nice and clean. Oh, I guess probably because it's open, huh? And we're going to make another structure, and this is for the ItemStats. So you're going to have to adjust this based on what kind of stats you're using in your game. But for mine, I just did health, defense. You want to make sure these are all spelled the same way as in the data table, or adjust the data table. And we'll go over real quick how these are represented in the data table. Whoops. So in the data table where we have this stats, this is how everything is going to be represented from a structure like that. You're going to have the open parentheses. You're going to have the struct row name, so health, and then 0, and then comma, and then defense, and then value, and then comma, and then attack, and then value, and then comma. So it's pretty important that you kind of set all that up. So if you're going to be adding stats or removing stats, like you'll add, I don't know, magic. You'll say comma, so no space, magic equals, comma. So you'll do one of those numbers if you're adding other stats in there. You're just going to have to troubleshoot around a little bit probably to make sure that everything is kind of coming in when you export this data table. It's the same thing with arrays. You want to make sure you have your little single apostrophe here if you're using Google Sheets, open parentheses, and then have the item. If you have multiple items, same thing. So 109, comma, 108, comma, 107, comma, 103, and then close parentheses. Just make sure you have this little apostrophe. Otherwise, it's going to turn it into a negative number. See, you don't want that. Make sure you have that apostrophe there. Okay. So let's go ahead and make our enums real quick. Go back to enums. We have CraftingType, equipment slot, and ItemType. Again, these are going to change based on kind of what you want your game to do. But for our game, these are just going to be how I set them up. Boop. So we have our equipment slot. Let's go ahead and start with that one. And this is going to be basically the slot for the equipment that that you've set up. We're going to be doing equipment in a later episode, but this is important for the item data, for the data table itself to actually populate. So I'm going to say none. Weapon main. Weapon off. Make sure I spelled those the same. And again, if you're going to change these values, I'll show you real quick in the data table where you might actually change them. Chest, guards, I spell that right. I probably should have just made it hands, huh? Guards, legs, boots, neck, and ring. So we're going to have weapon main, weapon off, head, chest, guards, legs, boots, neck, and ring. Okay. And those get set in the data table right here. right here, this equipment slot, row K. So we see that we have none for basically all of the crafting materials, but when we get into armor, it's chest. When we get into guards, it's guards. When we get into legs, it's legs. So you could change those if you wanted to make this, you know, hands or gloves, right? Instead of being labeled guards, you would just change all of the things that are guards to gloves, and that'll work like that. Or if you add slots, just make sure that you kind of keep that in mind. We did not do a dual wielding system here. We did a supplementary weapon that doesn't actually get used. It just adds stats, but equipment's not the point of this, so it's part of why we didn't worry too much. Crafting type. You're going to want to add one of these for every different type of crafting you do in the game. I'm going to say none. Blacksmithing. Make sure I spelled all these exactly the same too. Leather working. Whoop. Thread spinning. I'm just going to copy this straight from the data table. Wood crafting. I'm just going to copy them straight from the data table. Jewelry making. Cooking. And alchemy. So yeah, if you're going to be adding different types of crafting items or classes, you're going to want to add those here or remove them as needed. Just remember to update the data table accordingly. That is row F here. Alchemy, cooking, woodworking, thread spinning, blacksmithing, etc., etc. And now we have item type. This is the last one. Should be the last one we need to make here. Only going to be 4 values here. First one's going to be none. And none is just a catch to basically check things. We don't always use it, but sometimes we do. It's kind of something I like to have. Equipment. So is this an equipable item? Material. Is this an item used for crafting? And consumable. Is this something that you eat or drink? Make sure we copy all those directly from the data table. So I didn't fat finger anything. And we'll show that right here in the data table as well. Row E, material, consumable, equipment. So that's going to be something, again, you have to set up on your own. So we go into our ItemSoftData here, and we're going to put all those together. So we have our item type. That's going to be E_item type. Our crafting type. Our stats. It's going to be S_stats. Item stats, what did I call it? Yeah, item stats. Our equipment type, E_equipment slot. No. Yes. Yes. Equipment slot. I don't know why I called it that, but I did. And that is our ItemSoftData. So again, I know that was a little roundabout. Took us a little while to do that. So let's go ahead and refresh for our ItemSoftData. If you want to add or change values here, remember that the data table is not quite going to work. You'll probably want to delete the rows in the data table and add rows and change values according to whatever you need to change for your project. But if you're following along one-to-one with this project, these are the values you're going to need to have set. Item ID of a name, which is going to be the same as your data table row. Display name, which is going to be the display name for the object of type string. Description, again, type string, just the item's description. Item type of E_item type, which is just none, equipment, material, or consumable. Crafting type, this is how the item is made, so it's going to be of the type E_crafting type, which we just made. None, blacksmithing, leatherworking, thread spinning, wood crafting, jewelry making, cooking, or alchemy, which are all the different crafting types that we implemented in this game. Stack size, how much of the item can be stacked. If it's equipment, the stack size is usually 1. If it's not equipment, it's usually 99, but that's going to be up to you to decide on your own. Value, how much the item is worth. This is going to be for buying and selling with vendors later on. Weight, we didn't actually use this in the project, but it is included in the data table. This is how much the item weighs if you want to have a weight-based inventory system. It'll be nice to have that value later on. Stats, this is going to be of the type S_ItemStats, which is just health, defense, attack, speed, and durability, all floats. And that's again just for scalability later on. That way you can have stats in your game if that's something you want to do. If not, just go ahead and delete the stats field entirely. Equipment type, it's going to be E_equipment type, or E_equipment slot, sorry, I should say. And this is going to be the different slots that equipment can go into. So we have none, weapon main, weapon off, head, chest, guards, legs, boots, neck, and ring. Again, we're not doing too much with equipment in this demo series, but we are equipping items to slots just to kind of show how you might use that later on. We have our items required, which is an array of names, and these are going to be all the items that are required to craft a specific item. Quantity required, which is going to map directly to items required, and that's going to be how many of each item is required. And you want to make sure that you set that up for whatever the first item required is. The first quantity amount should be the amount for that item. Enhancement level, this is going to be if you're enhancing items later on. For my example, the consumables and the materials are all enhancement level 0, while weapons are enhancement level 1, and that determines whether or not an item can be enhanced further, and we'll end up building out that whole system later. For now, just know that this is an integer. And required level, this is if you're using classes and levels in order to craft and gather items. This is going to be the item, the level that your class is going to have to be in order to either craft or gather the item. So keep that in mind. That's all set up in the data table. So now that we have our structure, we're going to make our data table. So we're going to come into this data tables folder, new miscellaneous data table, and we're going to use that ItemSoftData. Let's say OK. DT_ItemSoftData. I'm going to open that up, and we can see that if we were to fill this out manually, it would take quite some time, which is why I'm not going to do that. I'm going to re-import. I'm going to go to our downloads, and we're just going to grab that data table. And boom, it all filled in nice and neat. So again, I'll have that data table listed in the description. I'll have a link to it, so you can go ahead and access it, copy it over to your own spreadsheet software, edit it as needed. Just know that the one that is there is going to work exactly for this system. And if you want to end up removing things later, you'll have to delete things and remove them as needed. Okay. So I'm actually going to close out of most of this stuff since I no longer need it. And I'm just going to open up the gathering node again. Because now we are finally going to go and actually start doing stuff with our gathering node. You can finally get into all of the different events here. Hopefully you're sticking with me. I know this episode's going to be a bit of a long one. Alright, so in our gathering node, we're going to have quite a few events and functions here. And we're going to need to make our interaction blueprint in order to kind of wrap this all up and make it work. So the first thing I'm going to do here is on event BeginPlay, I'm going to make a unique node name. And this is so that we can save the data. Because we're going to be harvesting our nodes, right? And they're going to have a time stamp that is going to determine when they were last harvested. And we're going to use that against the UTC now to determine whether or not they need to respawn. And in order to get that to work, like after we've saved the game and exited the game, we need a way to load that data. And since you could have thousands of these nodes across your entire game, we need some way to get a unique ID for each of them. That way the save game object knows exactly which node has a status of harvested or a time that they need to respawn at. Okay? So we're going to create a variable here called node unique name. And this is going to be of the type string. You could make it name or whatever else you want. But it just needs to basically be a value that we can set up here. We're going to make sure that's private because I do not want this to be edited from anywhere else in the game. And I'm going to make a setup category since we're going to have quite a few variables here. We'll need to use those. So I'm going to make that setup. I'm going to put all these in setup. because it pertains to how the item is set up. So, yeah. I'm going to drag that out and I'm going to set it. Now we need a way to get a unique value for this every single time that this is in the world. So we're going to first get our static mesh. You can drag it out, or you can say get static mesh. I'm just going to drag it out. We're going to get the world location. I'm going to split this so we get all 3 separate pins. We're also going to get object name. And we're going to drag this into self. And this is going to get the exact object name. So this will pretty much always be unique. And then we're getting the location to like guarantee that it is 100% unique no matter what. And we're going to append all those values together. And this isn't really for display or anything of the sort. This is again just to give a 100% guaranteed unique node name. That way when we save, if the node is depleted or needs to respawn, it's going to have a unique identifier in the save game. Okay. So I know that's a little complicated. We'll go ahead and just log this. Do that since you can't actually do it with string. Just convert it to a text. Compile, save. And now when I press play, we'll see we have gathering node C7, C5, and C6, and all of their exact location data. So again, just having the gathering node is going to give it a different identifier. It's C6, C7, C5. It's going to have a unique identifier pretty much no matter what you do. But adding that location value on there just helps to guarantee that it's going to have a unique identifier. And we'll end up changing these names later on anyway. But for now, that's all we really need to know, is that we have this unique node name and it is properly setting itself on event begin play to the exact same value that it is supposed to be. Now, if these nodes move, if I were to move this, now it's going to be different. So now if I try to load this node, that node no longer exists, and we're going to handle that in the save game if it no longer exists to just remove it. But during gameplay, right, you're not really going to be moving these nodes. If you are going to be moving the nodes, like dynamically spawning them in slightly different locations, you're going to want to handle that explicitly, probably just get object name, honestly. Totally something that's going to be up to you, okay? Once again, before I actually try to access any data, since it's on the event begin play, there's going to be a lot of stuff happening at the same time. I'm going to go ahead and delay until next tick. I'm going to get a valid save game ref. And we're going to worry about the saving and loading and setting of the visibility in just a minute. Just know that we're going to be loading it up here, which is the whole point of this. Okay. So, what happens when I interact with this object? Right? We want something to happen. We want some way to interact with it. So right now, if I press play and I walk over to it, right, nothing's going to happen. Oh, by the way, if you want to be able to walk through them, which I do, we're going to come over here and we're going to search for collisions. Let's say no collision. That way I can walk through them. Kind of a personal thing I like to do. Totally up to you if you want to be able to walk through them or not. But we need some way to interact with them, because like we saw, nothing is happening when we walk over this. So we can do this in our player. We can do it in our game. I'm going to do it in the player, just so it's kind of central to where I want it to be. And I'm going to make a new folder here called interaction. And that's where I'm going to make this blueprint interface. Okay? That's what we need here, is a blueprint interface for all of our interactions, because we're going to be doing a bunch of stuff inside this interface. Call this BPI interactions. And the first thing we need to do is make our actual interaction event here. Okay? So with interaction interfaces, I like to add an I before everything I do. So I'm going to say I interact. And this is the core event that's going to be triggered when the player walks over an item. So I'm going to call this under the category triggers. And we need to pass some kind of value in here to know which actor is overlapping with this. So I'm going to take this, and I'm just going to say actor. And we're going to call this instigator. And this is kind of important because we're going to need to pull off of this and get the player controller and do a bunch of different stuff to actually display the interaction widget. And we're also going to need this to get details and data later on. For now, though, we can just stick with triggers in here, and that'll be fine. So inside of our gathering node, go to your class settings. Go to interfaces. Implemented interfaces, we'll see that we have none. I'm going to add one called BPI interactions. Compile, save that. And now we have our interfaces over here. We have our IInteract event, which gives us that instigator. I'm going to move this up here because it's kind of important. I like it to be on top. And the first thing we're going to do is run a branch. Because like I mentioned before, this this object here, this gathering node, might already be harvested. So we need some way to tell whether or not we can interact. I'm going to make a boolean here called BeginInteract, and I'm going to give this the category info. Okay. And this is something that we're going to be saving and loading and setting up later on. But for the most part, yeah, this is going to be set when we actually overlap with it and interact with it. So when we interact, I need to take this instigator here, and you could say does implement interface. But we don't really need to do that because I know for a fact that this is always going to be implementing that interface because it's only being called from the player. But maybe you want to check that anyway. I don't here, so I'm not going to do that. And then we need to call some kind of event from that interface to actually trigger something on the player. So I need to go back into the BPI interactions, and we need to make a trigger in order to do this. And we're going to call this gather item. So I'm going to make a new function in my interface. I'm going to call this IGatherItem. And we're going to have a bunch of different ways to pick up items in the game, which is why we need a slightly different interface event for each one. So IGatherItem is going to be for gathering items. We're going to have one that's called IAddItem, which is going to just add the item to the inventory. ICraftItem for crafting items, and that's going to determine how the player gets their experience values or whether they get experience or not. We're going to add a category here. I'm going to call this inventory because most things that happen with the player and the player's inventory are going to be in this category. And we need an input value here of item to gather. So we're going to have to make one more structure. I know you guys are probably fed up with me, but we're doing a lot of things. So inside the player, I'm going to add a new folder called inventory. And this is where all of our inventory stuff is going to end up being held. So we'll put our actor component and all that stuff in here. But for now, all we need is a structure. Called InventoryInfo. And this is going to be the structure array that our inventory holds. So every single item is going to get a struct of inventory info, and that's all going to be held inside of the inventory component. For now, we just need to make this so that we can pass it through our interaction. So we're going to have an item ID. We're going to have a quantity. And if you're using enhancement levels, we're going to have an enhancement level. And that's pretty important here. And that's all we actually need inside of this inventory info. Okay? Item ID, quantity, and enhancement level. Now back in our IGatherItem, we're going to make that inventory info. Drag off of here and say IGatherItem. That way our target is BPI interactions. Yes. So if we can interact, okay, if we can interact on event IInteract, we're going to gather the item. Well, we need an item to gather, so we're going to make the inventory info. Item ID, pretty important here. But we also need a quantity, and I'm going to promote this to a variable called quantity. That's also going to be in our setup. It's going to be instance and exposed. That way when I compile, save this, and we have our gathering node here, we have a quantity, which is how many of the item is going to be picked up when we gather it. So you're going to want to set this to something. I'm going to set it to 10. I think most games will probably have it set to 3 or 5. Well, I'm going to set it to 10. That's how many of the item is going to be picked up by the player when you interact with it. Okay? So we're going to pass both of those in. We're going to make this structure for inventory info, and we're going to gather the item. I'm going to add an event log. Gathered X of I. And this is going to just add an event log every time I gather an item of exactly how much and what item I gathered. So we know that item ID here, right, is a number. So it's either going to be like 1, 3, 5, 7. So we need some kind of way to get the display name from this item ID, which is why we made the data table earlier. So yeah, we're going to do that in our function library. That way we have kind of a central place to do this, and it can be called from anywhere because we are going to need to call this a lot. Now we could just get the data table row and get the value out that way. So to keep things kind of clean here, when I only need one value or maybe 2 or 3 values from the data table, I'm just going to make custom functions for them. So I'm going to say get item display name, and I'm going to put this in the category of item. And again, this is not necessarily required, but it does help. That way we don't have to get the data table row every time, break the out string, do all that. So we're going to get data table row of the ItemSoftData that we made earlier. We're just going to pass right in the row name, and we're going to call this item ID. We're going to break this row out open, and we are going to return the display name. Okay, and that is our get item display name function. This can be pure because we're just getting that straight out. Okay, so back in our gathering node, we're going to take our item ID, get item display name, and I'm going to plug that right in to I. I'm going to plug the quantity in here. Okay. So I know, probably a little roundabout, but we're going to be making a whole bunch of those to get different values out of the data table. And again, that's just so I don't have to get the data table row and do all that stuff every single time I need anything at all. And now we're going to call another custom event here, because now we have gathered this item. We want to make sure that we can't just keep spamming gather item. So we need a way to disable the item. So we're going to add a custom event DisableInteraction. We're going to call that custom event DisableInteraction. Okay. And real quick, let's go into our player and make sure that we actually implement that interface before we forget. So we're going to go into our BP player, class settings, interface, and add BPI interactions. And now we'll see in our interfaces here, we have this inventory IGatherItem. And we'll be using this later on when we make our inventory component to actually call that inventory component to pick up the item. We could add the interface event directly in the inventory component, but personally I don't really like doing that too much. This is just going to tell the player to gather the item. And we're going to run some XP functionality, which is going to deal with another component. So that's why I want that in the player and not the inventory component itself. You'll see when we make that later on. Okay. So now we're going to do this DisableInteraction custom event. I'm going to pull that down here. So the first thing I want to do on DisableInteraction is I want to get the static mesh. I want to set its visibility to hidden. And this is going to be up to you how you handle it. Maybe you have like a nub and you'll want to add another static mesh or add it in the ItemHardData or something for nub or stub or whatever you want. I'm just going to hide the mesh. A little bit easier to do that for me. We're going to take this canInteract. We're going to make sure we set that to false. We're going to get our UTC now. Whoop. Which is just UTC now. I don't know why you can't say get. Kind of annoying. And we're going to promote this to a variable. So this is when the item gets harvested. We call DisableInteraction. So when it gets harvested, we have a depletion. Hopefully I spelled that right. We have a depletion time. And we're going to be using this in just a minute when we run our timer to check and see if the respawn is available. And this is also going to be an info. Now I want to save this information because now we need to save it, right? Because if we exit out of the game and reload the game right now, well, the item is still going to be there, right? It's just going to respawn as normal. There's nothing actually being saved or loaded. So I'm going to delay until the next tick, just to make sure that everything is properly set up and computed. I'm going to get my valid save game ref. And we're going to have to add AddGatheringNodeSaveData here, which is a function we're going to have to make inside of the save custom. So let's go ahead and do that. And we're going to need yet another structure. I know, I'm killing you guys with the structures. We go into our objects, gathering. Inside of gathering node here, we're going to add a structure. And we're going to call this node save data. And this is slightly different from item save data or anything like that, because this is the data that the save game object is going to hold on to in order to kind of make this all work. And this is going to have 3 values. This is going to have the unique ID, so not the item ID. It's going to have that unique ID that we made on event BeginPlay. It's going to have is depleted. So the current status of the node, if it's active or depleted. Now we don't necessarily need this because this is only going to be saved when the node is depleted. But I kind of like to have it. We're also going to have our depleted time, which is going to be a date time reference. Okay, so that is our structure for node save data. Just a string, a boolean, and date time for the unique ID, if it's depleted, and the depleted time. So now we need to go into our save game and actually add a way to find if that node has already been saved inside of the save game. And if it has, we want to update it. And if it has not, we want to kind of leave it alone. So what we need here is an array. And this is going to be gathering node save data. Or we can just call it node save data, since we know that we're using node for gathering nodes. And it's going to be of that structure, node save data. And I want to make sure it's an array. And I'm going to add this to the category gathering node, because we're going to end up with a lot of variables in here that all need to be saved. So it's kind of important that we categorize things as we go along. Okay, now I need a function called AddGatheringNodeSaveData. And what this function is going to do is going to check and see if we already have the gathering node in here. And if we do not, we are going to add it to the gathering node save data. That way it knows what it's saving. So we need an input pin here. We're going to call this inNode. And I'm actually going to run another function inside of this one. Let's actually add this to the gathering node category real quick. But I'm actually going to add another function inside this one, because we're going to be doing this multiple times. We're going to need to run through the node save data when we load the game and when we save the game. So it's better if I just make a little function for this, okay? I'm going to call this GetGatheringNode. Same thing in the gathering node category. And this is going to have the unique ID string as an input value. Okay. This could probably be pure. I didn't want to make this pure because it's very important. I never want it to fail. But this could probably be a pure function if you really wanted it, if you're really that picky. So we're going to take our node save data. We're going to run a for each. We're going to see equal, 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 exactly equal string, 3 equals. We're going to break the array element. And we're going to see if we have this unique ID already inside of this array. Actually, we want, by the way, if you just drag out and hit F, you'll get the for each loop. But I actually want a for each with break. because I don't want to loop through this infinitely. If we find the item, we can go ahead and break out. We don't need to keep looping once we've found the item. So I'm going to branch. If that's true, if I found the item, I want to promote this to a variable, a local variable called LNode. And I want to promote this to a local variable as well called LIndex. And these are going to be the two values that we're getting returned. With indexes, make sure you set it to -1 by default. That way, if everything returns false, it's actually going to be -1. We're going to use that as a check later on. Otherwise, you could set a bool here and say LFound, which we do sometimes, but not this time. And you would be able to check that LFound. But with indexes, you can usually just say -1. And if it's -1, then when it returns -1, we'll know that it didn't find it. We're going to take our LIndex here and our LNode, and we're just going to pass both of them right in through. We're going to call this index, and we're going to call this node. That way, if we got a valid index, then we'll have a valid node. If we didn't get a valid index, we didn't get a valid node. Okay, so that's our GetGatheringNode. Again, this could probably be pure, but for the sake of making sure that it is 100% accurate, I did not make it pure. Kind of just a personal thing. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. So we're going to break our in node here. We're going to add the unique ID into the gathering node. Okay. And if we found the index that we were looking for, then this is going to be greater to or equal, or greater than or equal to 0. Now we could always check if it is exactly equal to -1. I do this sometimes as well, and run it that way. But if it's greater than or equal to 0, then it's not -1, so it's valid. So why do we need to check that? Because if it's true, right, if it is valid, then we need to get this node save data here. And we need to set the array element. So this is on the true. Set the array element, the index, and the item. Okay? And that's going to be the index and the item we just found from GetGatheringNode. Only if it's greater than 0, which means we already have a save reference for this node inside of the array. If we do not have a save reference for the node inside of the array, then it's going to return -1, which is less than 0, and run this false. Then all we need to do is add the node to the node save data. Now in my example project, I added a return node with the index. I don't think I ever actually used it, but this could be nice for troubleshooting later on if for whatever reason we get some kind of error. That way we can see exactly what index that node got added at. But yeah, that's that. Right? So we have our GetGatheringNode. We're also going to use this when we load to get the exact node data out of there. Our AddGatheringNode. And I want to add one more thing in here for gathering nodes, which is going to be remove gathering node. A remove gathering node is going to work more or less the same way as add gathering node, except we don't need to do this. Whoops. Yeah. I actually wanted to duplicate add gathering node. Whoops. Duplicated the wrong thing. Anyway, it's going to work more or less the same as add gathering node. So we're going to get the gathering node. If it's less than or equal to 0, we don't actually need to do anything. We're going to add another one here called node removed. Boolean. We don't actually need to do anything off of false. Add the index in here. We don't actually need this. This is again just for debugging. And if it is again greater than 0, that means we found the index somewhere. Delete this. We need to come off of our node and we say remove index. And I'll show you why we're doing this in just a second. This is basically just to kind of keep the save game object a little bit smaller, because we don't need a reference to nodes that are just sitting in the world at normal status in our save game. They're just going to load up like they normally would and should. So when we respawn the node, we're actually just going to remove the index from this save game array and let it save itself, and that way we don't have a colossal array. I know that does sound a little weird because we set the array element in here. And this is basically just a failsafe, this whole true branch, because it should never have the node save data in here if the node is not already harvested, and you can't harvest the node once it's harvested. So this should never happen. Okay, this should never happen. But because we wanted to have a nice fallback in here, we just went ahead and did it. So those are our 3 save functions. Hopefully you stuck along here. Here's the most important one, which is GetGatheringNode. That runs a for each of all of our current save node data. Breaks them open, checks the unique ID. If it's true, we're going to set local node and local index and break and return them. If it's false, it's just going to loop through all of them to make sure that we don't have a saved reference and return -1 on the index. AddGatheringNode is going to check that value. If it's -1, we're just going to add the node. If it's not -1, which it should not happen, but in the event that this does happen, we'll set the array element to the node index, and that actually needs to be in node. I know I just kind of pushed everything together there. But we actually need to do this as the in node from the actual function itself, not the node coming out of gathering node. Okay, we're going to use that in just a second. And RemoveGatheringNode is basically the same thing. We're going to get the gathering node. If it is greater than -1, that means it exists. This should happen. We'll remove it. If it does not exist, we won't do anything because we don't need to do anything. Now back in our gathering node, if you remember where we left off, we are on DisableInteraction. So we're going to get our BPFL, our valid save game ref here, and we're going to add GetGatheringNodeSaveData. So because we just gathered this node, we now need to save that the node has been gathered. I'm going to make that. I'm going to take our unique node name. I'm going to take our isDepleted, so that's going to be canInteract. And that's actually going to be not. I'm going to take our canInteract and get the not from it for isDepleted. We're going to get a depleted time, which is going to be that depletion time that we just set. Okay. So now we're saving all 3 of these values. So when we load up here, we'll get that unique node name. We'll get whether or not we can interact, and we'll get the depletion time. It should be not. Because if canInteract is true, yeah, it should be not. Okay. And then we're going to try to save the game. Then we're going to run the respawn timer. So we need a custom event here to run our respawn timer. Now, if you're making a multiplayer version of this game, this is something you might want to have on your server instead of in here, but that's going to be totally up to you. For us, we're just doing a local game, so we can just have it right here, and it'll be fine. But you're basically going to copy this logic onto the server for a multiplayer. And we're done with this custom event here. We're going to comment it something like disable the item when harvested. And we're all done with that. And you'll see in just a minute, we're going to load up this stuff here. Actually, I could probably do that now. We'll finish this up now. So on our event BeginPlay, if you remember, we are setting that unique node ID, delaying, and then we're getting our valid save game ref. Well, now we need to run this GetGatheringNode, okay, with that unique ID. This is going to check and see whether or not we have a saved reference to this gathering node or not. If we have a saved reference, we need to load it. If we don't need to do much of anything. So again, greater than or equal to 0. If it's greater than or equal to 0, we're going to set canInteract. I'm going to break this node data, right? Because this is true. This means that we have saved data. IsDepleted. If it is depleted, we cannot interact, so we need to once again get a not here. I should have just labeled this as can interact, but you know, sometimes we got to be difficult. And we're going to get our depletion time here and set that to the value that we saved. So if it is not depleted, then we can interact. If it is depleted, then we cannot interact. That's what that not boolean's doing. You could add an event log here and say node not found or node found if you wanted to. I don't think we need to do that. And then we're going to run our can interact, and we're going to set up the cosmetics again. You could make this a custom function if you want to do. Keep it a little bit cleaner. But no matter what, we're going to run this. And I don't like the way that looks, so we're going to do that. And that's fine. We're going to run this into a branch, and this branch is going to set the visibility of the static mesh, just like we did down here. Okay, it's going to run this. So if it is true, we can interact, it needs to be visible. If it is false, we cannot interact, it needs to be invisible. And on false, we are going to need another custom function here, or custom event, called CheckNeedsRespawn. And this is going to tie into the timer. So we're just going to call it here, and we'll build out that function in a minute. But that's going to tie right in with our timer, so it's kind of important to have. And that's all we're going to do on event BeginPlay. Call it set up the item, because that's what it does. And we'll comment this and say interaction event, since we're all done with that as well. That way everything's kind of nice and tucked away. Alright, now we're going to run our respawn timer and check needs respawn. So these are two fairly important things that we're going to do here. We're going to have one more custom event, and then that's going to be it. Yeah. I know this episode's getting pretty long. Hopefully you're sticking with me. And we're going to run respawn if we need to respawn off of CheckNeedsRespawn. Okay? So, run respawn timer. Pretty simple here. Set timer by event. We're going to loop it. It's going to be 60 seconds. You can set this to whatever you want. I know some people will do this off of event tick. That's perfectly fine. But, yeah. I like to do a timer here. Promote the handle. Give it a name. And give it a category of timer. So we have our respawn timer handle here, and we're going to need this later on to deactivate the timer. We only want this timer running if the node is not spawned, okay? So we need to run this check needs respawn every minute or every hour, or if you really want, you can take a respawn timer value we're about to make and divide that by whatever you want. Okay, so we need to check needs respawn, and like I said, we are going to need a respawn timer event. So in our setup here, we're going to make another value called respawn time. And this is how long in seconds it's going to take for this item to respawn once it has been harvested. So if you want this to be 60 seconds, right, that's 1 minute, so it's going to respawn every minute. 600 is going to be 10 minutes. And that's probably what we're going to end up setting it to later on. For now, I'm just going to set it to 5, and I'm going to set this to 5 as well. That way we can actually see this happen, and we don't have to wait 10 minutes. But you're going to want to set that to however long is reasonable for your game to actually respawn the item. So check needs respawn. We're going to get our UTC now. If you're using an in-game clock, you're going to want to use that value instead of UTC now. But for this example, we are going to be doing that. For this example, we're going to be doing that based on global time and not in-game time. So we're going to take UTC now, we're going to subtract, and we need to do date time minus date time. And that's going to be minus our depletion time. And this is going to get the difference between our current time, so if it's 12 o'clock, right, and we depleted this at 11 o'clock, that's going to return 600, right, for the 600 seconds. as long as we get total seconds, right? And that's going to accumulate all of the seconds of difference between these two values. We're going to see if that's greater than. I guess we could also see equal to. We're going to see if it's greater than respawn time. And if it's greater than respawn time, that means it's time to respawn, because our UTC now is greater than our depletion time. We need to make sure that this item is spawning back into the world. So on true, we're going to call respawn. And that's going to be the functionality that we use to respawn this item. We're going to get that respawn timer handle, clear and invalidate the timer. Because this timer no longer needs to run if the item is spawned into the world. So we don't want to, like, every single item to constantly be running this timer when it doesn't have any reason to be running the timer. So yeah, that's all we're going to do here. Just going to go ahead and clear and invalidate. We'll do everything else we need to do inside respawn. So CheckNeedsRespawn is just going to check if UTC now minus the depletion time is a greater amount of seconds than your respawn time, and if it is, it's going to respawn and stop the timer handle. If the timer handle is valid. If the timer handle is not valid, it's not going to do anything. You could check is valid timer handle first if you really want to, if you're getting errors for some reason, and then branch that and say true, clear and invalidate. But I don't think we really need to do that here. Clear and invalidate, if it's not valid, should handle itself. So we'll just call this respawn timer. It can be more detailed if you want, but I don't think we really need that. It's just going to be the respawn timer. That's all it does. Now respawn, our final custom event here. Sorry, I sneezed a minute ago and now my voice is all crackly. It's going to set the visibility of the mesh to visible. Again, if you're swapping meshes, you're going to want to go ahead and swap meshes instead of setting visibility. Totally up to you. Let's set can interact to true. I'm going to valid save game ref. And we're going to remove the gathering node from the save game. That way, again, we don't have a giant array of gathering nodes that aren't kind of just sitting around not doing anything. And we're going to try to save the game async. And that way that updated GetGatheringNode is actually properly saved. No longer in the array. Boom. Okay, and that is all of our event graph functionality inside of GatheringNode. I know that took a little while. We will go over it real quick. We have our event interact from our BPI interactions, which is going to check and see if we can interact. If we can, it's going to call the instigator to gather the item via the interactions. It's going to make that item data with the item ID and quantity. We're going to print a little log that we gathered the item, and we're going to disable interaction. Disable interaction is going to set the static mesh to not visible, set can interact to false, and UTC now, depletion time, delay, and then it's going to save that node data in the save game. That way we can run the respawn timer anytime we need to actually reload the game. And remember, on disable interaction, we're running the respawn timer. On load, so on event begin play, when we set up this node unique name, and we get the gathering node, if it is valid or not valid, if we cannot interact with the node, which means the node is, actually we set that visibility to false actually, which means that the node is not valid, it still needs time to respawn. We need to check this respawn timer. And if, actually, we need to do something here. My bad, I almost forgot. I actually do need to see if this is a valid respawn timer handle. And if it is not a valid respawn timer handle, we run the respawn timer. Now you could always just run the respawn timer here instead of checking if it needs respawn. But yeah, so false if it has not respawned, then we need to check and see if it needs to run the respawn timer. Yeah, because it's not valid in the world, and yeah, don't forget to add that. Okay, that's disable interaction, runs the respawn timer. Our respawn timer is going to set the timer by event. respawn. Check UTC now minus depletion time. Get total seconds. Total seconds greater than respawn time. Go ahead and respawn. If not, go ahead and run the timer. If the timer is not already running. And then respawn is just going to set the visibility back to true. Set the can interact back to true. Get the valid save game ref and save. One more thing we need to do is make sure the can interact is true by default. At our respawn time, we're actually going to instance and expose this. That way you can set it up when you put the node into the world. So now we have our node in the world. We also have our respawn time. So if I want maybe this one to be 10 minutes and this one to be 5 minutes, that's how we're going to do that. Okay, now we need some way to actually interact with this, because I know we just did all that work and still nothing is happening. So I want to make sure you have something to show for this before we go ahead and leave today. Maybe we'll make the UI. I'm not sure. This video is getting pretty long. But we need to go into our player here. Okay. And we need to have a way to trigger this IInteract via the item that we are walking over. So what I'm going to use here is I'm going to use a capsule component. And I'm going to say on component begin overlap. On component begin overlap. Something I normally do here is see if it's locally controlled. You don't actually have to do this, but if you're setting things up for multiplayer, it's kind of important to make sure it's locally controlled. Take our other actor, does implement interface, and that's going to be that BPI interaction. Whoops. That way, if we're walking over an item that does not implement this interface, we don't have to worry about it. It's not going to do anything. We're going to run that off of our true, so we are locally controlled, and the object implements the interface. We're going to have to do something with our player controller here and make a widget to interact with it, but we'll do that probably in the next episode. What I'm going to do right now is take this other actor and promote it to a variable called currentInteractable, and we're just going to set that on true. There's going to be one more interaction event we're going to do in the next episode as well, called GetGatheringNodeSaveData, and then we're going to run a switch based on that to see how we're going to handle harvesting. But for now, we are just going to go ahead and interact. So when I walk over this item, we're just going to interact with it. And in the next episode, we'll go ahead and clear all that other stuff up. We'll make the input event for interactions and do all that good stuff. For now, we'll just interact when we walk over it. Okay? So when I walk over it, boom, I interacted. I gathered 0. 0. And we see that it respawned. Why did I gather 0? Because the quantity here is 0. Let me make our quantity 10 on all those. Let's see, gathered 10. Gathered 10. Gathered 10. Made sure it saved every time, so it's saving the current status of these things. Let's go ahead and make our respawn timer 60 seconds for this. Just to show you that, boom, we saved. And when we press play, it's still not there. Doesn't exist in the world. And when we walk over, and next time we'll pick it up again. Right? It'll take 60 seconds to respawn. So that's all for this episode. Hopefully you followed along. I tried to make it as simple as possible. I know we did a lot here, and we're going to do a lot more in the upcoming episodes as well. So please stick with me, and if you need to, I'll make sure I add the timestamps to the video. Go back and watch it as many times as you need. Ask questions in the comments section, and we'll do our best to make sure we help you out here. Thanks for watching. Actually, I'm gonna wait for this to respawn. Hey, see it respawned. Okay. I don't know, 60 seconds is a long time to wait. If you're enjoying the videos so far, I urge you to join our Patreon. For just $3 a month, you'll get access to all of the videos in this series as soon as I create them. Always available on Patreon, always free, and ready to go. You'll also get a copy of the example project so you can follow along step by step with a real visual guide in the project.